Good morning, Vietnam. Here I am, back to a 19th vlog, I think. And this one is going to be about the major presidential lies from presidents from the USA, and starting from Lyndon Baines Johnson. Even though he didn't get us into the Vietnam War, he could have easily got us out of it at any time. And I'm going to list actually all the presidents since then and what whoppers they've given us over that time. This vlog has turned out to be the third part of a trilogy that I've done. The first one was on media and how media has failed us and failed all the citizens of almost any country. The second one was about the war crimes and massacres that have been committed in also the last 100 years. So this one's going to focus, they're all interconnected, of course. Vietnam being the central war that combines all three significantly. But anyway, let's move on to this particular vlog, and that is I am going to read occasionally from my notes. I'm going to add my notes as an addendum to this vlog, and it'll be a separate vlog as it makes the whole vlog much shorter and doesn't intimidate people from looking at it from the beginning. All the writings are in red, are my comments and thoughts. So I'll start with the first article I found. America's false history allows the most powerful to commit crimes without consequences. And I guess this is the main narrative of these three podcasts I've done, is that it's going to continually happen in the Western world, at least, where politicians can start wars, kill, massacre their own soldiers and get away with it. And they'll keep doing it. The Western populace has a very short memory. 10, 20 years later, they're in a major war, the US especially. So, Robert Parry, the journalist, talks about this, and I'll read from the final paragraph from the excerpt I have included in my notes. At the end of Chapter 8 of America's Stolen Narrative, Robert Parry writes, "But the end result of the failed investigations into the presidencies of Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush meant something else for the American people. They were left wandering in a wilderness of false narratives, trying to chart their future on a map drawn by liars. And no matter how much we get articles like this, and how many documentaries are made on the folly of the presidents and the wars they get their countries into, it just never stops because they're never held accountable." So the next article is the 7 biggest lies in presidential history. I actually cover 13 people, 10 presidents, and 3 or 4 major staff members, cabinet members of those presidents. So this article is, again, the 7 biggest lies in presidential history. There is plenty in this article, but I will list my favourite lies, listed by presidents and subordinates. I have added all the presidents from LBJ onwards, and I've involved the presidents of the Vietnam War, plus a general and a Secretary of State. Kissinger gets special treatment, of course, but Ronald Reagan gets none, but a URL that lists his very, very, very long list of lies and misdeeds. Okay, to start off with LBJ, two excerpts from this article, which I list, from actually CNN. At the same time that he spoke with such great bravado, he admitted to his advisors all of his fears and concerns. On February 26th, I believe 1962, or 3 actually, LBJ told Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, "I don't think anything is going to be as bad as losing, and I don't see any way of winning." So just before he committed the thousands and hundreds of thousands of troops, LBJ was already not convinced that he could ever win this war. He also admitted, "The great trouble I'm under. A man can fight if he can see daylight down the road somewhere, but there ain't no daylight in Vietnam." So they already knew this before they sent in the troops. But, you know, his ego, couldn't save face, believed that it's the only way he could tell the other cabinet members, the opposition party, that he was the tough guy. So he was just going to go kill a few million Vietnamese and 50, 60,000 Vietnamese soldiers. So he knew he was never going to win the war, and even the previous President Truman was egging him on. Go! Kill some more people in the world. And of course, I've watched quite a few of his interviews, LBJ's, and they always, he and Westmoreland, which I'll talk about next, always talk so positively how everything was going in Vietnam and how they will eventually win. And of course, they eventually lost. So General Westmoreland gets a special mention because he was probably the most unqualified general ever to have such a position of power and have a control of a war that was so monumental. So this particular article from Foreign Policy, LIES, just did a minor correction on my notes. And this particular article lists 10 reasons why Westmoreland was the wrong guy, let alone why they should have been in there in the first place. But I agree with all of them, but 4 out of the 10 I list as numbers 3, 4, 5, and 8, I believe are the real reasons why, the main reasons that he had no control over the war really in the end. Number 8 is he was uninterested in other viewpoints on how the war might be prosecuted. Number 5, he denied senior civil officials accurate data on enemy strength and composition. In other words, they would go into battle not knowing, well, him not telling his staff and especially the South Vietnamese army what was the strength of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. Number 4, his war of attrition, basically search and destroy tactics. And his big thing was how many Vietnamese soldiers or civilians did we kill today? And of course, my big thing after living in Vietnam for 10 years is simple. He underestimated the enemy's staying power. The Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, they had been hardened already by over 50 years of war with the French. They weren't going anywhere. No matter what the US Army were going to do, they were going to fight them till their dying breath and the last dying soldier. But of course the US, and especially Westmoreland, couldn't understand that. They were like the kamikaze pilots of Japan in World War II. They just give up their lives to defend their country and from the invaders. So, that was taken actually from a book from Louis Sorley, Westmoreland, the general who lost Vietnam. My notes: how do people as powerful as presidents appoint these morons to a position of uncontrollable power? Look at Trump's choices of his cabinet ministers. Almost all of them resigned in the first year or two because of their inexperience and stupidity, and they wouldn't do his bidding. If you look at historically all the wars that the US gotten itself into, almost all of them were gotten into by Republican presidents. If you look at Clinton and then Obama and now Biden, none of them started any wars. I mean, yes, they did kill people, but not really one American soldier died during their time in office, except when the withdrawal of Afghanistan under Biden was such a botch up that I believe 16 American soldiers died in a suicide bomb. And the next, of course, Vietnam is, as I said, is such a big part of this trilogy on media, wars, massacres. How did Vietnam, well, what convinced LBJ to get into Vietnam, the war? One of the main reasons was what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin. And anyway, I go into this extensively and list the excerpts from an article. But basically, McNamara refused to tell LBJ when just after it occurred. There was actually 2 attacks on a US destroyer, and the first one was a minor retaliation because of some bombing that occurred. But the second attack never really happened. And there was a report done on it by a commander, US Army commander, and McNamara never gave it to LBJ. So LBJ assumed or was told that there was a second attack on the destroyer. And of course, the next one is Robert McNamara himself, Secretary of Defense, another moron, liar, who egged on or refused to tell the truth to LBJ, that they really should have gotten out of the war. And as you know, later in life, he totally regretted the decisions he made to get into Vietnam and stay there. So here's a little bit about him. McNamara wrote in his 1995 memoir that his own behaviour in shaping the war was wrong, terribly wrong. But to many, including then editor of the Times, Howell Raines, that confession was a little late. Was too little, too late. And of course, he never mentions or regrets, or he seems to have no discomfort on the millions of Vietnamese he ended up helping to kill. Raines wrote in, an editorial piece, his regret cannot be huge enough to balance the books about dead soldiers. The ghosts of those unlived lives circle close around McNamara. And in fact, a US Senator described Vietnam as McNamara's war. The next step, of course, in the Vietnam War was the great Nixon and the demonic Kissinger, who used the war totally to get elected and continue it, of course, and lied through their teeth about it endlessly. Political ambition, or as some might call it when it comes to Richard Nixon, treason, prolonged the war in Vietnam for half a decade, and this is how it happened. So I refer to that article and get an excerpt from it. And of course, the one and only, one of the great demons of world history, Henry Kissinger. From my readings of the last 50 years, since I've been political, I would say since 1972. Actually, I was in the draft in Australia in 1970 or 71, I don't recall. And my birthday date did not come up in the draft, so I wasn't conscripted. I don't think I would have gone. It's not in my blood to kill another human being a few thousand miles away for no particular reason. So, as I said, from my knowledge over the last 50 years, is that Richard Nixon wasn't really aware what Kissinger was doing most of the time and the decisions he made. And one of the biggest ones, which Nixon did not know about, was that Kissinger gave the go-ahead to bomb a lot of Cambodia along the so-called Ho Chi Minh Trail, which the North Vietnamese was using to get arms and equipment south from North Vietnam into South Vietnam by going through Cambodia. And there's absolutely no legal justification for what Kissinger did. And of course, there was never even a hearing or any indictment of Kissinger for bombing a free nation. So I give a couple of other articles about Kissinger and how, and I list from one of the articles 5 countries: Argentina, how we help get rid of the democratic leader; Bangladesh, how the war in Pakistan, before Bangladesh became a free country, its own country, how there was war crimes going on and he allowed it to happen. And mainly, it looks like about 3,000 Bengalis mostly were killed. Cambodia, of course, I've just mentioned. They dropped 540,000 tons of bombs. Of course, the number of killed, we don't know, but it's estimated between 150 and 500,000. Chile. Well, if you don't know that story, I suggest you look it up. how General Pinochet called Kissinger and said, you know, I don't like this guy, Allende. We just elected him democratically, but he's a real socialist. And I'm very worried about my country, and I think we need to kill him. And apparently Kissinger said, sure, go ahead. The next country listed is East Timor. Again, if you don't know that story, please look it up. So, on December 6, 1975, President Ford and Kissinger stopped to meet with Suharto in Jakarta. Suharto told them that he wanted to invade East Timor, and was there a problem for the US? We will understand. This is a quote from Ford. We will understand and will not press you on the issue. We understand the problem and the intentions you have. Yeah. The next day, East Timor was invaded and 200,000 people died. My notes. What the F was Nixon doing when all of these decisions were being executed, many without his knowledge? Kissinger's direct decisions cost about a minimum, directly 2 million lives. And yet still, up until quite recently, he's been feted by the great, the one and only Obama. Between Nixon and Reagan, the worst presidents by far. And two of the biggest liars. But Reagan, he's the king. And here we get to Ronald Reagan, the one and only. I'm not going to talk about him. The article lists something like 30, 40 instances where he lied through his teeth. I'll only mention when he was governor in the 60s, he closed many mental institutions, and he promised to reopen something like a halfway house, where when people got into severe difficulties, they could at least find a shelter to spend some time in. And I can't tell you how much I hate this guy. And because in 1975, my brother had a huge mental breakdown and has been taken care of ever since by the government. And I really, really appreciate that. We get on to the next president, George Herbert Walker Bush. The Inconvenient Truth. It's an article by The Intercept. So he's so engulfed, ensconced with Reagan, but he did his own war, of course, the invasion in Iraq in 91, 92, and dropped 88,000 tons of bombs, killing tens of thousands of Iraqis, because he felt like he had a moral obligation to get the Iraqi army out of Kuwait. And I've read stories, and they're available on the internet, that indicates that Kuwait was stealing Saddam Hussein's oil because they have a mutual oil field. Well, I'm not sure if it's mutual, but it was claimed that Kuwait was drilling laterally into the Iraqi oil field, and really pissed off Saddam, and he had a lot of debts, and he had a big debt to Kuwait as well from the 10-year war with Iran. So, but that was his war. And of course, I advise anyone interested in how bad these guys are is to look at the whole Iran-Contra affair. I will not go into that. My notes. It must also be remembered he was accused by multiple women of sexual harassment. And there's an article that I listed gives these instances where he was accused, and also how many presidents have been accused of sexual misconduct. So that's an interesting article. And Bill Clinton. I mentioned he didn't start a war, but there's a possibility that he did incidentally because of his affair with Monica Lewinsky. And I list a number of URLs, articles that you can check about the Lewinsky scandal. And I mentioned that in my last vlog about the bombing of the pharmaceutical factory in not Libya. Oh, it's not coming to me now. Anyway, he bombed a pharmaceutical factory a few days after he gave testimony in Congress about his affair, and the whole thing was totally, wag the dog, trying to distract attention from his sexual misconduct by bombing this pharmaceutical factory. But I mention this again because in this article, which I do mention again here, and the last sentence is, this conspiracy theory would influence Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of Qaeda's Hamburg cell and the September 11 attacks. So it's claimed that because Clinton bombed this pharmaceutical factory, it was in Sudan. It really upset the Al-Qaeda's leadership, especially Mohammed Atta, and there is speculation that this pissed off Atta so much that he planned to do a airplane attack in the US, and it may all be absolutely totally true. So we will never know if that's true, of course. And there is a number of articles that also talk about how that bombing of the pharmaceutical factory could have influenced the 2000 election and caused a number of people to not vote for Al Gore. And of course, as we know, the Florida recount was only done by, Bush only won by about 500 votes. So here's another classic example of ego and hubris on a president because he can't keep his dick in his pants. George W. Bush, the second Iraq invasion. So, I'm sure all of us can remember the mushroom cloud that he was advertising as a backdrop when he was trying to convince the American people that he should invade Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction, they were part and had influence on the Twin Towers bombing, 9/11, and of course it was just garbage after garbage after garbage. And so, just a quote from this article, history is likely to judge Bush most harshly for two things in particular: launching a war against a country that had not attacked us, Iraq again, and approving the use of cruel and inhuman interrogation techniques. unbelievable. And of course, neither is remotely true. That there is any legitimate reason, of course, to torture anybody the way they were doing it. And the great Dick Cheney, to quote him, "Judgments are a little more measured than they were, and that history is coming around." Well, guess what, Dick? You big dick. It's never going to come around. Bush is a pariah. He can't even leave the country. You can't leave the country in case you get indicted for your war crimes. So, anyway, I list a number of points on that last article. And we get to Barack Obama. The many lies he committed. And of course there was an article by NPR you can keep it. Promise is lie of the year. And that lie is, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. And it was 2013's lie of the year. And of course I lived in US for 33 years and I lived through all that. I never believed Obama 1 second at any time. He was a pure politico, like all of them are. And I love when he first got elected, that billboard of him looking so calm and serene and majestic with the word hope. Yeah, hope full of shit. That's all we got from you, you asshole. So that list talks about that lie and, of course, many others. My next heading is, the biggest Obama scandals are proven and ignored. Of course they are. So, and there's so much evidence that he broke the law so many times. And of course, even the Republicans didn't care for some odd, weird reason. And we get on Donald Trump. Of course, his biggest lie is that the 2020 election was stolen. I won't get into that. It's just too recent. You can read these excerpts and the article. You can read the whole article if you like. I've only written, like Ronald Reagan, both psychopathic liars had really no idea that everything that comes out of their mouths is a lie. Just listen to Ronald Reagan, anytime, anywhere, and everything he said was just full of shit and bullshit. Joe Biden, I cannot really say there are whoppers, but compared to the great one, Donald Trump. But anyway, there is some false claims he has made. You can check from this article. There is a handful, but compared to all the other guys, it's like a drop of a bucket or a sand granule on a beach. So my final comments: the more presidents lie, the bigger the lie, the more they love and remember them fondly. But with George W. Bush's lie about Iraq, it appears that was too much, even for the gullible US citizens. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.